Hello everyone, welcome back to SwitchUp. My name is Glenn and today I have a list video for you looking at 10 games that utilise a pixel art style fantastically well. Now looking back through the games on the Switch that I've played that use a pixel art style, it became apparent very quickly that there were easily more than 10 that could have made this list, so there's certainly scope here for a part 2 sometime in the future. With this in mind, obviously there'll be some obvious games missing, some I've left out intentionally because we've mentioned them in other list videos recently, and some I just run out of space. But if there are any that you do want to recommend, then please do stick them in the comments section below, and as I say, they may well make a part 2 sometime in the future. Just finally before we start, although the main aim of the video is to look at the pixel art, they do have to be good games. I do need to consider them fun to play, otherwise there's no real point recommending them. Okay, with all that said, let's get started. Okay, the first game then, or games I suppose you could say, and it's the Kingdom games. More specifically though, the sequel, Kingdom 2 Crowns. Now I reviewed this one a little while ago, and it's a tower defense game I suppose you could call it to some extent, with some item resource management thrown in for good measure, set on a 2D plane where you take the role of a monarch that has to build up your kingdom, building towers to defend your people, exploring the lands before eventually being able to build a boat and move on to the next section. It has a very addictive gameplay loop, and in terms of the pixel art, it's absolutely striking, with the standout feature for me being the water that cascades past the screen in the foreground. It has some amazing levels of parallax scrolling, but this water really just seals it for me. Seeing the reflections of the surroundings, seeing the ripples in the water, I believe fish jump out of it as well at some point. It's a really beautiful effect to what is not only a very stunning looking game, but a very fun game to play as well. Next up then we have the Cadence of Hyrule, which is a rhythm-based game based of course on the characters from the Legend of Zelda franchise. Now it's not very often that Nintendo lend their characters out to external sources, so the faith they had in this development team obviously was very high, and they didn't disappoint with a very fun game which played surprisingly similarly to a traditional top-down Zelda, albeit of course with that rhythm-based element. Now looking at the pixel art, it's beautifully clean, has that classic Zelda aesthetic to it, keeps things very traditional in that respect, but also brings something quite new to the table at the same time. The colours seem a little fuller than they would have been on the Super Nintendo, a little more crisp and bright, and it just has such a joyous and cheery look to it, you can't help but smile as you play. Next one is a game called Songbird Symphony. Now this is another rhythm-based game which has you partaking in minigames and also solving some puzzle platforming as well. The pixel art in this one is quite traditional, very clean and very bright, but has an incredible layer of charm added to it as well. Whilst not as complex as some of the other games on this list, or some of the other games that aren't on it to be fair as well, it's hard to deny a spot to a game that just looks so cheerful. The next game is a game we've mentioned a few times on the channel, but it couldn't really not be included, and that was Dead Cells. Now Dead Cells is a roguelite action platformer that sees you having to get as far through a run as you possibly can, and obviously death means going back all the way to the beginning, although you are able to upgrade certain skills each time you play, which will make each subsequent run possibly a little bit easier. Now in terms of that pixel art style, this is one beautiful looking game, especially the level, in my opinion at least, called the Ramparts, which just looks stunning. You have the yellow and oranges of the sunset, the burning reds imparted on the buildings, and those silhouetted rooftops of the foreground as you make your way across the level. Character animations are slick and fluid as well, which makes combat a real joy to partake in, making this an all-round fantastic game on pretty much every single front. The next one is Blasphemous, which is a Metroidvania which I think it's fair to say takes some inspiration from Hollow Knight and also Dark Souls in terms of some of its mechanics. This is a brutally difficult game with a very macabre pixel art style which depicts some of the gruesome events that take part as you play through. Now I would hazard a guess that this has been heavily inspired in terms of its aesthetic by the Divine Comedy. I may be wrong, but it's amazing how fantastically well this subject matter translates to pixel art. The next game I've picked is a game called Timespinner. Now Timespinner is a Metroidvania, but it's quite a simple one. I don't necessarily mean the difficulty, although it's not massively hard either, but what I mean by that is it's very clean cut and it knows what it wants to achieve. You can probably finish it in about 8 hours, but you'll have a good time whilst playing it. Now in terms of the pixel art, the reason I chose this one is because it's probably the game that looks most like it could have been a Super Nintendo game or possibly a PlayStation game in terms of its overall style. It's not one of those that uses pixel art but does it to today's standards. It seems very traditional to the early to mid 90s. Having said all that, some of the outside environments really do look quite stunning. In particular, I liked the sand dune backgrounds against the turquoise skies. The next game came out very early in the Switch's life and of course had been on other platforms beforehand, and that is Shovel Knight. Now Shovel Knight was one of the first games that I'd encountered when I played it on the 3DS that used what became affectionately known as the 12-bit art style. It was clearly inspired by the classic 8-bit look, but looked way too good to have been possible on such a console back in the day. Shovel Knight is a true testament to pixel art and it shows just how beautiful it can look, yet how simple it can be at the same time. While some environments will look relatively sparse, the levels of detail in the backgrounds at times is truly spellbinding. It's a fantastic platformer, well worth the hype it received at the time and continues to receive to this day, and possibly one some people have even forgotten is actually on the Switch due to the influx of new releases since. Next then we have another game that came out quite early on in the Switch's life. This is The Mummy Demastered. Now this is actually a movie based game and they are of course infamous for being terrible, but this one's decent and is only loosely based on its movie counterpart. It's a Metroidvania, again not particularly long, around the 6 or 7 hour mark, and at the price it's going for I'd certainly advise a sale, but it's a very good game nonetheless. When it comes to the pixel art, I absolutely love the outdoor sections, which have a real Super Ghouls and Ghosts vibe about them, with the hugely detailed environments, the gravestones, the church in the background, the overturned ambulance, really gives a sense of a world gone to pot. This is another game that perhaps people have forgotten exists, but if you do see it on sale, I'd highly recommend it. The penultimate game then is Shakedown Hawaii. Now this is probably one of my favourite uses of pixel art on the Switch so far. The game itself is a spiritual successor to Retro City Rampage and plays very similarly to the first couple of Grand Theft Auto games with that top-down perspective. When it comes to the art style, I absolutely love the amount of detail on each small character sprite. The amount of expression they show as they walk down the streets or react to what it is you are doing really does bring this game world to life. I loved the sunny setting of Hawaii, I loved how day turned to night as you were driving around, the details within the world itself, the billboards, the references to popular culture within the shop names. It really is quite incredible how much detail is packed into this game's small world. The final game then, and although the rest of this list hasn't been ranked, this one is probably my favourite, and that's Valfaris, a game I reviewed quite recently. Now, in terms of the gameplay, Valfaris is a run and gun action platformer in a very similar vein to games like Contra or Turrican. It's incredibly brutal, but extremely satisfying when you get further into it. When it comes to the art style, in my opinion, this game just looks incredible. You have the fact that the alien world is made up of so many contrasting ideas. You have the clear technological advances that this planet has over Earth, but it's dilapidated at the same time. Then of course you have the colour scheme, which uses very bright neon colours and somehow seems to make them work when mixing them all together. I don't think I've ever seen a game take such a gaudy colour scheme, I said this in my review, and make it work. The only real downside I would suggest is the lack of detail in the main character sprite, which is a little bit disappointing, but at the same time it does work quite well against the detailed backgrounds. For me, this is the best use of pixel art on the Switch so far, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes next. Anyway, that's the end of the list. I hope you enjoyed it. Obviously there'll be games missing, I could only include 10. As I said, some may have been missed out because they were in a list previously, or some I may have just forgotten about. There are so many good ones to choose from. Please do stick any that you know of in the comments section below, and I'm sure there'll be a part 2 to this list at some point in the future. A quick thank you to our patrons as always for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.